The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that made the air feel heavier. The conference room was too clean, too polished, the kind of sterile space designed to strip emotion out of whatever was about to happen. She sat across from her boss, a man with a practiced smile and hands folded neatly on the table, and already she knew. He didn't start with numbers or performance charts. He didn't need to. Instead, his words came coded in corporate politeness. "We've decided you're not the best fit for our culture moving forward." The phrase slid across the table like ice, vague enough to sound professional, sharp enough to cut. She blinked, forcing herself to hold his gaze. Culture. That was the word they always used when they had nothing real to say. Her reviews had been strong. She had landed clients, others couldn't. She had stayed late, covered shifts, trained new hires. This wasn't about culture, and he knew it. The silence stretched, so he added more words. Words that only deepened the insult. "We appreciate your contributions, but we feel it's time to move in a different direction." His tone was rehearsed, his eyes sliding away when they should have met hers. Her mind flickered through the moments that had led here. The whisper she caught in the break room about how loud her natural hair looked. The joke about her being so articulate. The manager who once told her she had too much attitude in meetings, even though she had spoken less than half her peers. She remembered the looks, the quiet dismissal when she brought up new ideas, only to hear the same suggestions praised when repeated by someone else. She sat straighter, folding her hands calmly on the table as if she too were rehearsed. "So this is final?" she asked, her voice steady. "Yes," he said quickly, relief flickering across his face at her composure. "We'll need you to clear your desk today. HR will be in touch." She nodded once, stood, and pushed the chair back without sound. Fury burned under her ribs, but she let it settle deep, out of sight. Her dignity was not theirs to take. As she walked to the door, she caught her reflection in the glass, shoulders squared, chin high. The whispers in the office stopped as she passed through the halls. People looked up from their desks, curious but unwilling to ask. A few eyes lingered with something like pity, but she didn't want pity. She wanted the truth spoken out loud. They would never say it, not in words, but she had heard enough to know. At her desk, she packed slowly, sliding her notebooks and pens into a small box. She left the framed photo of her family for last, pausing to touch it before tucking it away. The weight of her fury was no longer heavy. It was focused, sharp, ready to be used. By the time she stepped outside, the sun was still bright over the city, and for the first time since she sat in that cold room, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. They thought they had ended her story. In truth, they had only handed her the beginning of the next chapter. The apartment felt smaller that night, the walls pressing in as she dropped the box of office belongings onto the kitchen table. Bills sat stacked in the corner, unopened envelopes with red stamps peeking through. Her mother's voice floated in from the living room, gentle but lined with worry, asking if she was all right, if she needed to rest, if things would be okay. She answered with a simple, "I'm fine," though fine was the last thing she felt. Instead of collapsing on the couch, she pulled her notebooks from the box and spread them out across the table. Page after page of handwritten notes filled the surface, strategies she had crafted, client pitches she had refined, systems she had built that her team used daily. These weren't just scribbles, they were the foundation of success, the framework that had kept the firm's biggest clients satisfied. She had done the heavy lifting, the creative thinking, the structuring. They might have fired her, but they could not erase what she had built with her own hands. She flipped through a section marked with colored tabs, revisiting the ideas she had suggested in meetings, only to see them dismissed until someone else repeated them. Every margin note was a reminder that she had always been the one thinking ahead. They wanted to say she didn't fit their culture, but the truth was she had carried that culture, given it breadth and results, and they had been too blind to see it. Her chest tightened when her mother walked over, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You need rest, baby," her mother said softly. "Don't let them take your peace too." She looked up, managing a small smile, but her hand kept turning the pages. There was no rest for her tonight, not with the fire rising inside her. The fear was real, the unpaid rent, the looming school fees for her younger brother, the sharp edges of survival that pressed against every decision. But beneath the fear, was something sharper: defiance. They thought they had ended her, thought she would slip quietly into the background while they kept using the systems she had built. They didn't understand. Those systems weren't theirs. They were hers. She grabbed a fresh notebook and began sketching a plan. The movements rough but urgent. Contacts she still had. Clients she could reach out to. The way she could reshape the ideas they once exploited into something new. Something independent. She whispered to herself as she wrote, the words like a promise no one else could hear. I don't need them. I never did. Hours passed. The city outside grew quiet, the hum of traffic thinning into silence. Her mother had fallen asleep on the couch, worry still etched in her face. But at the table, surrounded by papers and the beginnings of a new vision, she felt something shift. The humiliation of the firing no longer sat heavy in her chest. Instead, it burned like fuel. They hadn't just fired her, they had handed her the reason to rise. Her laptop became the center of her world, balanced on the chipped kitchen table surrounded by stacks of notes and half-empty coffee cups. With no office, no title, and no safety net, she started small. She reached out quietly to old contacts, people who had trusted her in the past, even when the firm hadn't given her credit. A former client remembered the way she had gone the extra mile to fix a campaign at the last minute. Another recalled how she had listened when others brushed off their concerns. Slowly, the first few projects began to trickle in. The jobs were modest at first, logos for small businesses, consultation calls with owners running shops, barely keeping afloat. The pay wasn't much, but each invoice she sent and each payment she received carried the weight of independence. Nights stretched long into dawn as she juggled deadlines, her fingers sore from typing, her eyes red from fatigue. Bills were still stacked, her bank account still fragile, but every small success felt like a crack of light breaking through the heavy wall they had tried to build around her. What she lacked in resources, she made up for in consistency. She answered emails within minutes, revised drafts until clients were satisfied, and explained strategies in plain language rather than jargon. Her honesty disarmed people. They felt seen, heard, valued. Word spread quietly. A baker told a florist. The florist told a friend who ran a catering company. The network expanded, not through flashy advertising, but through whispered trust. Her apartment transformed into a one-woman office. The kitchen table doubled as a desk, her phone buzzed constantly, and her calendar filled with color-coded appointments. She learned how to budget down to the cent, how to stretch a dollar until it worked as hard as she did. The exhaustion was real, but so was the growing list of names in her client folder. Each success became a brick in something she was still too cautious to name. She wasn't just freelancing anymore. She was building. Building credibility. Building momentum. Building proof that she had been right all along. Her work didn't just match what the old firm had done. It surpassed it. Clients no longer complained about being ignored or brushed aside. They bragged about the attention she gave them, the results she delivered. One night, as she closed her laptop after finalizing a proposal, she leaned back and let the thought settle fully for the first time. They had fired her for being different, for not fitting into the narrow mold they protected. But that difference was the very reason she was succeeding now. What they had thrown away, she was reclaiming, piece by piece, client by client. And though the hours were long and the money still thin, the foundation of something larger was already taking shape beneath her feet. The email came late at night, long after she had shut her laptop and convinced herself she needed at least a few hours of sleep. The subject line was simple: need to talk. She recognized the name immediately. It was a client she used to service back at her old company, one of the largest accounts on their books. Her pulse quickened as she opened it, the words jumping off the screen. Deadlines missed. Calls unanswered. Promises made, but not delivered. They wanted to explore alternatives. Quietly, discreetly, she sat there for a long minute, staring at the glow of her phone, weighing the risk. Taking this on meant going directly against her former employer, stepping into the kind of territory that could not be brushed off as small freelancing work. It was dangerous, but it was also the kind of break she had been waiting for. With a deep breath, she typed out a response, professional but confident, offering to meet and discuss their needs. The meeting was held in a cafe downtown, neutral ground. She arrived early, armed with mock-ups, data, and a pitch she had rehearsed a dozen times in her head. When the client walked in, their handshake lingered a little too long, their expression lined with frustration. Over coffee, they explained how the arrogance of her old colleagues had cost them patience, and how the missed deadlines were costing them money. She listened, carefully, jotting down notes, asking questions that went beyond surface fixes. By the time she pulled out her proposal, they were already leaning forward, eager. Her pitch was sharp, clear, and without the fluff she knew her old company leaned on. She laid out realistic timelines, strategies tailored to their specific market, and the promise of personal accountability. No assistant to pass the blame, no endless bureaucracy, just her and her commitment. The silence after she finished stretched for a moment, then the client nodded slowly. "We'll give you a shot," they said. When she left the cafe, her hands were shaking, but this time, from adrenaline. She had done it. She had taken one of their pillars, a client they never imagined could slip away, and turned them into her own. It wasn't just money. It was validation. Over the next weeks, the project consumed her, and she poured every ounce of herself into it. Deliverables landed on time. Reports were polished. Results came faster than even she had expected. The client's trust deepened, and with it, her confidence grew. Word traveled quietly at first, whispers in the industry about the freelancer who was outperforming the firm. Then, her name began appearing in emails, in networking circles, in conversations at events. Colleagues from her old job noticed. One reached out with a cautious message. "Heard you're doing big things." Another spotted her at a conference and gave a nod of reluctant respect. She was no longer a footnote in someone else's success story. She was the competition. That single win became the turning point, the moment when freelancing shifted into something larger, something undeniable. What had once belonged to them was hers now, and it was only the beginning. The first big client was the hardest to win. After that, it was like a door swinging open and refusing to shut. Calls came in slowly at first, polite inquiries from businesses who had heard her name mentioned in passing. Then came the messages from frustrated managers, ones who had grown tired of missed deadlines and canned excuses from the firm that had let her go. Each conversation carried a familiar undertone, a quiet dissatisfaction that she had once noticed when she worked inside their walls but had been told to ignore. She didn't promise miracles. She didn't offer discounts or desperate deals. Instead, she listened. She asked questions that mattered. When a small marketing agency came to her complaining about being overlooked by the firm, she remembered the very strategies they had once dismissed and reshaped them into actionable steps. When a local retailer reached out, burned by sloppy campaigns, she gave them something clean, measurable, and personal. The results spoke louder than anything she could have said. Clients began shifting over, not in a flood, but like dominoes falling one by one. Each move was quiet, discreet, sometimes cloaked in secrecy to avoid burning bridges. But the pattern was undeniable. Every signature on a new contract felt like justice, each invoice a reminder that she was carving out space where none had been offered before. The old firm noticed quickly. At first, they brushed it off as coincidence, a few dissatisfied customers leaving. But as the list grew, they scrambled. They slashed prices, sent out promotional offers, and promised better service. Their desperation was loud, but it wasn't convincing. Clients knew the difference between noise and substance, between empty words and results delivered with care. She never had to badmouth them. The contrast spoke for itself. In coffee shops and late-night emails and in boardrooms with hesitant executives, her reputation grew. She wasn't just another option. She was becoming the preferred choice, the name whispered when someone asked who could actually deliver. Her inbox filled faster than she could respond. What once had been a fragile freelance experiment was now a rising tide, and every success built upon the last. Her former colleagues began to notice too. Some watched from a distance, curious and silent. Others reached out quietly, congratulating her or asking if she had room to bring them on board. The irony was sharp. The same people who once stood by while she was pushed out were now wondering if they could stand beside her as she rose. Through it all, she kept her focus steady. She worked late into the night, her fingers cramped from typing, her mind constantly moving from one project to the next. But fatigue was easier to carry now because every tired morning meant another win, another name, another piece of proof that they had been wrong. By the time she signed her fifth major client, she no longer thought of herself as just surviving. She was competing, and she was winning. The dominoes kept falling, one after another, until the old firm's silence said more than their desperate campaigns ever could. Her phone rang in the middle of a packed afternoon, the name flashing across the screen, one she never thought she would see again. For a second, she considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of her. She answered, steadying her voice as if she had been expecting the call all along. The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped, carrying the weight of someone used to commanding fear. He did not waste time on greetings. Instead, he reminded her of the day they let her go, his tone dripping with false authority. "We said you didn't fit," he told her, as if repetition could turn prejudice into fact. "And now I hear you've been poaching clients. That stops now." She let the silence stretch for a beat, long enough to make him uncomfortable, before answering. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "I didn't poach anyone. They came to me. They came because I listen, because I deliver, because I give them what you never could." He scoffed, a bitter sound wrapped in disbelief. "You're nothing without us. Everything you're doing now is because of what you learned under my roof." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though he couldn't see it. "You're right," she said. "I did learn something working there. I learned what not to be. I learned that when you fired me, you weren't firing my work. You were firing who I am. And the very thing you thought made me unfit is the reason clients choose me now. Authenticity. They trust me because I am myself, not a mask of your culture." There was a pause on the other end, heavy and sharp. She could almost hear his pride cracking, the reality sinking in. He tried to gather himself, tried to pull the weight of his title back into the conversation. "You won't last," he snapped, though the force in his voice had faltered. "You'll burn out. You'll fail." She leaned back in her chair, surrounded by the buzz of her own small but growing office. The sound of her team in the next room, the steady ping of incoming emails, the contracts waiting for her signature, proof that his words were nothing but noise. "Maybe," she replied softly. "But even if I do, I'll fail being true to myself, and you'll keep failing by pretending to be untouchable while everything around you falls apart." For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then, with a frustrated exhale, he hung up. The line went dead. She sat for a moment in the quiet hum of victory, her pulse steady. He had tried to intimidate her, but he had walked away powerless. The man who once signed her dismissal letter could no longer dictate her worth. He was just another voice in the past, while her future unfolded one client, one contract, one victory at a time. The morning light slanted through tall windows, catching on the etched glass door that bore her company's name in bold, clean lettering. She paused for a moment, fingers brushing the handle, letting the sight settle into her bones. Months ago, she had walked out of a sterile conference room with a cardboard box and fury clenched tight in her chest. Now, she walked into her own office, where the hum of possibility filled the air. The space was alive with motion. Phones rang, keyboards clattered. The murmur of conversation flowed between desks. Her staff diverse, brilliant, sharp, moved with the kind of energy that came from being seen and valued. She had built this team with intention, hiring people who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed the way she had been. Every face in the room reflected the world outside the glass walls, not just one narrow slice of it. She made her way to her office, the glass walls offering her a view of the floor. On her desk sat a stack of contracts waiting for signatures, each one proof that clients trusted her company more than the firm that had once cast her out. She opened one, her pen gliding across the page with calm certainty. Every signature was more than ink, it was a declaration that she had arrived. Her phone buzzed with a new message from a former colleague. Another quiet acknowledgement, another whispered admission that the old firm was shrinking. Their desperate attempts to lure back clients had fallen flat. Their name no longer carried weight. Their arrogance no longer masked their failures. Reputation was fragile, and theirs had shattered the moment authenticity rose to take its place. She leaned back in her chair, letting the thought sink in. They had believed they could erase her. reduce her to a warning for anyone else who didn't conform. Instead, they had lit the fire that pushed her to create something stronger, something that could not be dismissed with vague excuses about culture. The office door opened and one of her staff stepped in, a young woman with a quick smile who had once been told she was too quiet for leadership. Now, she managed an entire division. She came with updates, with numbers that showed growth, with ideas for expansion. As they spoke, laughter rose from the floor outside, the kind of laughter that never filled the halls of the place she had left behind. When the meeting ended, she stood at the window, looking out over the city. The skyline stretched endlessly, towers of glass and steel glinting in the sun. Somewhere in one of those buildings, her old employer was likely pacing, tallying losses, still trying to understand how control had slipped through his fingers. She smiled, not with malice, but with certainty. She never needed their permission. They thought they had ended her career, but all they had done was hand her the reason to build an empire. And here it was, alive, thriving, undeniable.